Nameless Woman, Chapter 2, The Triune Cities. The first step when hunting, decide what and where to hunt. Naturally, it is the same when the prey happens to be human. As worship, priests, magic, and gods of all kinds were forbidden by the Tyrant line, the capital was the least likely place to find a so-called prophet. So the woman set out south from the frozen towers of Keshdan and its snow-laden mountain. She easily blended with the masses, traveling home after the Fair May festival that had congregated to travel south through the gray-skied, green-quilted land of Junturas. As the crowds camped in the rolling pastures and forest lands, they split off the main road at various junctions, heading for home. She wore a thick woolen skirt and a bundle of wrapped shawls to blend in with the other travelers as best she could. Thankfully, a caravan like this was easier to disappear in. All sorts of folk, common and strange, had traveled to Keshdan this year to gape at the king-killers' corpses and hear the news right from the source. The 100th Tyrant king was dead, not 6 months after the first attempt on his life that had killed his wife and youngest child and wounded his heir. "If you ask me," Henny, the farrier's gossipy wife, said through a mouthful of her stew at the breakfast circle, "it's his brother the steward who's done it." She sniffed and wiped her nose with the back of her hand before ripping off another bite of hardened bread with yellowed teeth. The food was bland at best, but that was how the Northerners ate, for sustenance only. It wasn't terrible, considering it was made out of whatever could be stored in the back of a wagon for weeks on end, but the price of the full meal charged by these wagons was ruthless. "Killed his own brother?" One of the other women shook her head in disbelief. "Of course it was his own brother. That's how they do it, royal folks, always killing each other for a chance to sit on that cursed rock for a while. Until their son, or brother, or cousin comes along." The farrier agreed with his wife. "Unless it were the heir himself," one of the grandmothers added sagely before taking a sip from weathered lips. "Killed his own father for his throne. It's how it's always been." It had always been that way in Junturas, at least for the last 2,050-some years. But the woman knew the histories these folks never dreamed of. Despite its claims, the Kingdom of Tyrants was far from the only reigning power in the world, and it wasn't considered common practice to murder kin in every corner of Mancipitas. "Well, they get what's coming to them then, don't they?" someone's uncle muttered. The woman took a sip from her steaming mug that had cost her an outrageous 3 shillings and said nothing. She split off from the snaking caravan at the Triune cities, while others took the road around and continued heading south. The Triune cities were the crowning jewels of Junturas and had belonged to the continent longer than the Tyrants and their empire had even existed. The 3 largest and most ancient in the kingdom, each of the sister cities, was densely populated and lay in a series of sprawling rings like the age lines of a tree. The most ancient parts of the cities, tiers 1, 2, and 3, lay in the center, surrounded by polished white stone that still glittered like marble in the sunlight, a silent reminder that these cities once belonged to the ancient Greno peoples, and not to the pale-faced men of iron and war from the north. Massive courtyards, libraries, noble mansions, and long-ago repurposed temples occupied the most protected ring. In varying degrees of wealth, the rings grew progressively more crowded as they drew farther from the center. Hemming in the 4th tier of the city were the most fortified city walls, 10 feet thick by 50 feet tall. The road between each city was protected on either side by 50 feet of stone. 3 massive iron and oak gates accessed each city, 2 linked one city to either of her sister cities, and 1 let outsiders in and out with careful interrogation and investigation. Besides the single outward-facing gate guarding each city, there was no way in or out, not without scaling the impossible walls of smooth stone and surviving the onslaught of archers placed 100 paces from one another atop it. The unreachable inner cities wouldn't have been possible without the incredible post-war surge of slavery after the Second Age Rebellion. From the fourth tier out, occupation of the rings grew greater, and the walls surrounding each one thinner and less fortified. Nearly anyone could travel with ease into the outer rings, but getting into the fourth tier was nearly impossible without an invitation. Unfortunately, for information on a priest warranting an assassin of her caliber, the woman would likely find her best information from a source beyond the fourth tier. Fortunately, she had a contact in the fifth tier who might at least get her started. Treasured for the immense amount of trade that passed through the sister cities, most streets were crowded, especially as the rings went further in and the wealthy became more accessible. The masses moved chaotically. Shrill criers, leering soldiers, and sweaty peasants scrambled out of the path of fine prancing horses, carting fourth-tier lords and ladies to and from the massive iron gates, wailing open and shut at the start of every hour. By the time the woman had made it from the seventh to the fifth tier of the northeastern city Adania, she was hot, covered in sweat, and the stench of human crowds bumping into her, and ready to tear out another throat if anyone else called her a slur or a name. The Moellan, Grano, and Burgazian populations tended to be restricted to the occupation of the outer rings of each city, and her bronzed complexion and the shape of her Moellan eyes did not go unnoticed in the fifth tier. Still, she kept her fangs retracted and itching gums, and swallowed her inhuman hisses. The Triune cities were one of the places she least wanted to draw unnecessary attention to herself, and her ancient Azu blood had a tendency to be memorable when she revealed it. Power here ran deep and old, and an outsider, even with her particular set of skills, could disappear if she crossed the wrong family or intimidated the wrong people. When she reached her destination, the woman paused to buy a cup of hot cider in the pub across the street from Madame Audette's bride pricing shop. Bride pricing was far from considered respectable among the higher classes, but many of those considered below them relied heavily on the money that and made on daughters sold into marriages or other arrangements. "Cider all you want, girl?" the bartender asked gruffly. "We've got company, too, if you're looking." The woman hardly spared a glance at the bare-shouldered men and women sitting in a neat line down the far wall. "I'm not," she said icily, taking a sip from her steaming drink and glaring out the window. "Just trying to be a hospitable Maui. No need to get all tight about it," the bartender muttered, and moved on before the woman could pull her lips back into a snarl at the word. She wanted to lunge at his turned back and bury her blade deep in a kidney. But she clenched her aching jaw and continued to watch men drag their daughters, nieces, and she-slaves into the shop across the street for measuring and pricing. Just before the shop's closing time, the woman left the bar without paying and stalked across the muddy street of an early spring. She didn't knock as she entered the large storehouse of a shop, divided into wall-less rooms by dirty sheets strung about from the ceiling. A spindly-looking young woman, probably somewhere in her second decade, sat on the countertop, her legs resting on the chair. She had on a plain blue skirt and a dull red blouse. Her skin was so pale veins could be seen swimming beneath it. Her hair so fine, in the light, the outline of her skull was visible. She boredly picked at her nails, and without looking up, she recited, "Bryce is just finishing up with the subject. Fill out the parchment with personal information. Pens here, benches there." She pointed with a thin hand at the pen, then the bench, then went back to her finger fiddling. "I'm not here for a pricing," the woman said, veiling any intention or meaning with a cool tone. "Begging your pardon, then." The frail girl's sapphire eyes flicked up sharply to assess the strange Moellan woman before her. "But you best be moving on if you don't have business with the madame." "I am here to see the madame," the woman replied calmly, eyeing a small brown-haired girl who was quietly crying in the waiting area. "But I am not here for a pricing." "You're here for a buying, then?" The girl tilted a sharp-featured face to the side like a hungry bird. "I am here," the woman said impatiently, "for your madame." Two blue eyes narrowed suspiciously, and the girl hopped off her perch on the desk, towering over the small assassin with a spindly height. She considered the intruder carefully, as though trying to decide if she could throw her back out on the street or not. Seeming to sense it would be a losing battle, she pointed to the rickety gathering of chairs and the sniveling girl. "Wait there." She stalked down the line of sheet walls after her mistress. The woman sat a few chairs away from the crying girl and avoided her imploring brown eyes. "What's your name?" the girl asked, voice trembling on the edge of desperation. The woman resisted the urge either to roll her eyes or snap at the tearful human. She didn't feel like chatting, but didn't want to take her irritation and aggravation at the cities out on this girl either. "Maku," she lied with a cool though somewhat friendly smile. I'm Yevrin," the girl smiled back, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "Why are you crying, Yevrin?" Maku asked, despite it being a stupid question. The girl wanted to talk, and she could sacrifice the little bit of patience it required for such a small kindness while she waited. "I got priced at 7 golds, Yevrin said, tears welling fresh again. Maku eyed the girl calculatingly, thinking the madame had made a pretty generous price. The girl probably came from a 5th-tier family with some influence in the outer tiers to support the decision. "That's good, isn't it?" she asked. "Won't your family be pleased?" Not that a family that left one of their women in a shop like this to be priced like a prized hog took any delight in their daughters being beyond what profit they could make off their bodies. "Yes," Yevrin's face twisted painfully, tears painting her cheeks. "But I'm in love," she sobbed unashamedly. "And he'll never come up with that much before my father promises me to someone else." Unfortunate, but not surprising. The woman played sympathy with the girl, replying with a few nice phrases without any real meaning. There was little to be done about the situation. The girl would either starve with her lover, and likely die young, perhaps carrying one of his children, or she would marry an unknown man of greater standing who could afford to pay 7 golds for a woman, and possibly be misused, ill-treated, and unloved, but at least well-fed and perhaps longer-lived. To live and die for love, or to live a little longer, loveless life before death. The woman didn't know which was better, and she didn't voice her thoughts to the broken-hearted girl. The truth would not help here. Nothing would help here. "What do you want?" Madame Odette waddled into the room, dark auburn hair tied back stiffly behind a thick neck and plump fists planted on bulging hips. The woman stood in a single, lithe motion and offered the bride pricer a cold smile. "It is, as always, good to see you, Odette," she crooned. "You look well." She did not look well. She looked tired and worn out, fat off the selling of younger women's flesh. "I'm in the middle of the pricing," she snapped. "Spit it out." "I've come for the address of a certain gentleman," the woman replied, "and I had a feeling you might know his residence." "Probably," the woman huffed, green eyes narrowed hatefully. The madame had had the misfortune of selling one of her contacts in the city several years prior, and the contact had been whisked away from the city by her purchaser, not to be heard from since. Odette wouldn't know exactly what kind of business the woman had in the cities, but it was clear that her strange garb and obvious weaponry made the bride pricer eager to give her whatever she wanted to get her out of the shop as quickly as possible. Not to mention their first threatening encounter after the pricer had initially sold that contact. "I'm looking for the residence of Jack of the Armendas." The woman crossed her arms. "Do you know the address?" The madame snorted and rolled her eyes. "You don't go down by Armendas no more. He's Lord O'Peskin, runs the 4th tier pretty much, and yous won't be getting in there without a proper invitation." "I will worry about the invitation," the woman smirked. "You worry about the address." The pricer scowled at the woman with ever-calculating eyes, and the assassin wondered absently what her own price would be. The thought was amusing. Her desirability of her body was not nearly as valuable as the set of skills forged into it. "LeFou!" the pricer snapped. The spindly assistant stepped forward from the shadows, light from the windows reflecting suspiciously off her sapphire gaze. "Get her Lord O'Peskin's street address in the 4th tier." "But I don't know. He made a purchase here last month. Use his former name." "Yes, madam." The girl nodded with a scowl. "Is that all?" the pricer huffed. "For now." The woman smiled mirthlessly. With a few muttered slurs so quiet a human would have missed them, the pricer turned and walked back into the maze of tents to finish her examination. The woman followed LeFou back to her desk and waited patiently for her to search the books for the address. Her name, LeFou, seemed to be an ultimate irony to the woman. It meant sickly, and that was precisely what this pale, scowling girl looked like. Too thin, too pale. But the rage that poured off her frail frame was a palpable thing, and the woman marveled at the intensity of the girl's scent. What she lacked in bodily capability or feminine physique, she more than made up for in pure, radiating fury. The woman didn't have to guess this girl's story to know it. She was likely working off a debt to the pricer who had purchased her off her family for a ridiculously small sum, after she failed to catch a price that would attract any suitable men to fund her family's coffers. It was obvious she did not like her position, but the woman thought that it was a better situation than it could have been. She could have been sold for cheap use at a low-end brothel, as happened to many low-priced, unpretty girls. This was by far a better alternative. "Here." The girl shoved a slip of yellowed parchment into the woman's hand and sat down in her chair with another scowl. "Thank you." The woman smiled thinly and left without sparing either of the two fate-stricken girls another glance. This is J.P. Vesna reading aloud from my debuting novel, The Nameless Woman, which is the first novella in a series called The Mancipitas Archives. I will be posting a new chapter bi-weekly until the complete novella is posted here on YouTube as a free audiobook. If you'd like to receive regular updates, be sure to hit that subscribe button and follow me on Instagram at The Mancipitas Archives, or check out my website at mancipitasarchives.com. And with that, I present to you The Nameless Woman. Chapter 1. Killer. The assassin woke up halfway through the day with a headache. Silver eyes squinted painfully at the winter morning sun, piercing through the cheap room's single window, and her tawny, scar-dusted arm swung across them. The woman lay motionless for several moments, falling back into the clutches of oblivion, until a floorboard down the hallway creaked. Immediately, her sleep-softened body tensed, focus dedicated to listening. She heard 4 sets of boots, 3 heavy, 1 lighter. Smelling the air quietly, she detected whiskey breath, clay on boots, a very slight twinge of a tang she'd come to recognize as soldier scent, and the unmistakable musk of human males. There were a few quiet hisses, and the twang of steel cut through the other scents. Weapons. Quiet as a cat, the woman uncurled from her wraps and flipped her hip-length red-brown braid over her shoulder. It shone like blood in the morning light as she flashed past the window. The men quietly approached the other side of her door, unaware the assassin's heightened senses had already alerted her. 2 small feet slipped silently into brown leather boots, worn out and soulless, to avoid alerting even senses like hers. She tasted the air again. All male. Silent as a shadow, she flitted across the room, grabbing her twin crescent blades from her pack. She shifted the bag away from the door to allow the men easier access to the room, lessening their suspicion. She grabbed at the doorframe and studied the rafters in the inn room. Picking her way up the door like a spider, she braced herself between rafters, waiting for the flies to enter her web. The latch to the door flicked open easily, and the woman's lips pursed in displeasure. Evidently, the boarding house had given them both key and room number. The first soldier crept in, eyeing the pillow curled up under the blankets. He waved the other men in. One stayed outside to stand watch. The first soldier, a blond man in his late 30s, motioned for the smaller one to shut the door. Keep the killing quiet. As the door clicked shut, they all moved forward to advance on the bed. She dropped down soundlessly behind them, choosing exactly which floorboards to land on before she descended. There was no thud or whisper of air brushing her frame as she dropped. No sound that human ears could detect. The men crept over to the bed. The woman stalked up behind the men. One of them